I was halfway through a logistics rotation at Camp Pendleton when the Red Cross message came in. My father was in critical condition in Billings, Montana. The doctors didn't know how long he had. My commanding officer approved emergency leave, and within 24 hours I was on a flight home. 12 years in the Marine Corps had taught me how to move fast, but nothing prepared me for walking back into the old farmhouse with the smell of hospital equipment instead of coffee and bacon. My father, Franklin Monroe, had been the backbone of Big Sky Construction for 3 decades. The company started as a small contractor building grain silos and ranch houses. Now it held several government contracts for base maintenance across the region. People in Billings knew him as reliable, blunt, and fair. They didn't know how sick he was because he refused to talk about it publicly. When I walked into his bedroom, the once strong man who used to carry lumber on his shoulder was hooked up to oxygen and IV drips. I dropped my duffel in the hallway and got to work like it was another deployment. Organizing meds, making checklists, scheduling appointments, cleaning the kitchen. Military logistics transfers easily to elder care. My sister Charlotte, though, seemed to treat the whole situation like an annoying meeting on her calendar. She'd fly in from Chicago, spend one night at a hotel downtown, post some vague family time photo on social media, and fly out again. She built a name for herself flipping distressed properties in urban neighborhoods, and she liked to act like Montana was some dusty museum she had outgrown. The first week back, I barely saw her. She was busy taking calls from her investors in Franklin's study, the one lined with framed blueprints and old military commendations. When she did appear, it was to make comments about how quaint everything looked. She wore high-heeled boots in the mud and wrinkled her nose at the smell of diesel from Dad's old truck. I ignored her. I'd spent enough time with Marines who thought sarcasm was a leadership style to know that answering back only fed it. My father tried to play peacekeeper. Even with his voice ragged from chemo, he'd tell us to work together, girls, like we were still in high school. But the truth was obvious. He leaned on me for the day-to-day care and treated Charlotte like a guest. I handled oxygen tanks, prescription refills, meals, and bills. Charlotte handled looking successful. One evening in late February, while I was making dinner in the kitchen, Charlotte walked in wearing a blazer that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. She opened a bottle of sparkling water, took a slow sip, and looked me over. "So, you're still in uniform even here," she said, nodding at my USMC t-shirt. "Always the good soldier. You know that doesn't earn you points in probate court, right?" I kept chopping onions. "I'm not earning points, I'm taking care of Dad." She gave a little laugh. "Sure. Meanwhile, someone has to think about the business. Contracts don't run themselves. Dad's been running them. Dad's been sick for 2 years," she snapped. He needed someone with a real plan, not someone with a checklist. I set the knife down and turned to face her. "If you have a plan, great. Present it to him. But don't insult me for doing the work." She shrugged and left the kitchen, calling over her shoulder, "You'll see what loyalty gets you." Moments like that were why I stopped expecting thanks. The Marines teach you to do your job whether anyone claps for you or not. I focused on my father instead. Every morning at 0600, I'd help him shower, get dressed, and sit him in his favorite chair by the window. We'd watch the sun come up over the pasture. He'd ask about my last deployment, about the troops, about the new logistics software we were using. He still loved hearing how systems worked. Even as his body failed, his mind was curious. One morning he motioned for me to sit down. His hand shook as he reached for mine. "Haley, promise me something," he said. "When I'm gone, don't let Charlotte make any big moves without talking to Alan Whitaker first." Alan had been his lawyer for years. I nodded. "Why? What's going on?" "There are things she doesn't understand. Things I couldn't explain yet. Just promise me." I promised. He looked relieved, then closed his eyes to rest. I had the distinct sense he was trying to finish some unseen project before time ran out. Weeks blurred together with hospital visits and nights sleeping in a chair next to his bed. I managed his pain meds like supply drops, logged every change in his vitals, and kept the household running. Charlotte breezed in and out, updating her investors and making phone calls from the porch. She'd bring expensive flowers or organic smoothies, set them on the counter like trophies, and leave again. The day before he died, my father asked me to fetch a brown envelope from his desk. He slipped it under his pillow and whispered, Open this only when Alan gives the signal. His eyes were steady, but his grip was weak. He passed away early the next morning. No drama, no last speech, just one long exhale in stillness. I called Charlotte. She said she'd handle arrangements, and hung up before I could say more. The funeral looked like a corporate fundraiser. Charlotte arranged for catered food, a string quartet, and a guest list full of people from Chicago who had never met our father. She wore black designer sunglasses and greeted attendees like a politician. I stood near the back in my dress uniform, watching the woman who used to braid my hair work the room as if it were a press event. People told me how noble it was that I had stayed to help. Nobody asked how I was holding up. After the service, Charlotte took a phone call in the driveway. I heard her laugh. Finally, she said into the phone, "We can get moving on the company once this probate nonsense clears." I went back inside, sat at the kitchen table, and stared at the stack of casserole dishes neighbors had dropped off. My father's absence was louder than any of the condolences. I pulled out my phone and texted Alan Whitaker. "My father told me to contact you before making any decisions about family matters. Can we meet?" His reply came within minutes. "Of course, Haley. Come to my office tomorrow at 10 a.m. There are things your father wanted you to know." I put the phone down, feeling a weight shift slightly. For the first time since stepping off the plane, I sensed that my father's story wasn't over yet, and neither was mine. Alan Whitaker's office smelled faintly of leather and printer ink. I walked in right on time, still wearing my uniform because it was the only thing in my bag that felt like armor. Alan stood to shake my hand, his grip firm but his expression sympathetic. "Your father prepared for this carefully," he said, motioning me to sit. Charlotte was already there, scrolling through her phone like she was bored at a gate waiting for a flight. Two men in dark suits stood behind her chairs, her lawyers, of course. Alan didn't waste time on small talk. He took out a thick envelope, broke the seal, and began reading. "To my eldest daughter, Charlotte Monroe, who has shown skill in business and ambition in life, I leave Big Sky Construction, including all assets, equipment, and ongoing contracts. This inheritance comes with a 5-year management restriction preventing any sale or merger of company assets." Charlotte's sunglasses were perched on her head. She blinked like she'd misheard. "What management restriction?" Alan slid a paper across the desk. "You signed the stabilization agreement last year when you helped your father refinance a contract. It was included in the estate planning documents." Her lawyers leaned in, whispering. Charlotte's jaw tightened, but she kept silent. Alan continued. "To my younger daughter, Haley Monroe, who has demonstrated loyalty, patience, and sound judgment, I leave the family farmhouse and all associated property, including mineral rights and any related business agreements." Nas. The room went so quiet I could hear the clock on the wall. Charlotte let out a low laugh. "So I get a company I can't sell? And she gets a rundown house? That's cute." Alan didn't react. He reached under his desk and produced a smaller sealed envelope with my name on it. "Your father asked me to give this to you personally," he said. Charlotte rolled her eyes. "Of course he did." I took the envelope, tucking it into my folder without opening it. Years of working in secure facilities taught me how to keep my face blank. Charlotte wasn't done. "Alan, we'd like to review any recent changes to my father's will. My attorneys believe he may have been influenced while medicated." Alan's voice stayed calm. "Your father anticipated that concern. He obtained an independent psychiatric evaluation 4 months ago confirming his mental competence for legal decisions. The report is here." He handed a sealed copy to her lawyers. He also recorded his reasons for these changes. "Would you like to hear them?" Her lawyers glanced at each other and nodded. Alan pressed play on a digital recorder. My father's voice filled the room, weak but steady. "This is Franklin Monroe, speaking of my own free will on March 15th. I am restructuring my will because I have discovered information about our family finances that my daughter Charlotte does not yet understand." Charlotte's lips parted. "What? He's making me sound..." Alan paused the recording. "There are several hours of documentation, Charlotte. The point is that your father's judgment was clear." Her lawyers shifted uncomfortably. Charlotte sat back, crossing her arms. "Fine, play your tapes, but none of this changes the fact that she's been manipulating him for 2 years. I spoke for the first time. I was changing his oxygen tanks, not his mind." Charlotte smirked. "Sure. And now you get the land, Congratulations. Hope you enjoy mowing grass while I handle real business. Alan cleared his throat. We're not finished. There is more to discuss regarding the property, but per your father's instructions, that will happen in a separate meeting. Charlotte shot me a look. Separate meeting? Why does she get secret meetings? I stayed quiet. One of the Marines I served under used to say silence is sometimes the loudest answer. Alan closed the folder. This concludes the reading of the will. Execution of these instructions begins immediately. You will both need to sign acknowledgement forms. Charlotte's lawyers busied themselves with papers. She signed quickly, jabbing the pen at each page. I signed calmly, one page at a time, thinking about my father's steady eyes when he'd handed me that brown envelope. When the paperwork was done, Charlotte snapped her briefcase shut. Well, this has been enlightening. I have a plane to catch. She turned to me. Try not to burn down the farmhouse. Oh wait, it's already falling apart. She swept out of the office with her entourage. The door closed, leaving the room suddenly quiet. Alan leaned back in his chair. She's angry now, but your father believed this structure would protect both of you. He knew Charlotte's instincts would be to liquidate assets quickly. The management restriction forces her to slow down. He also knew you'd need time to decide how to handle the property. I nodded, still holding the sealed envelope. He told me to contact you first. That's why I'm here. Alan gave a faint smile. Good. He left detailed notes. We'll go over them tomorrow, once you've had a chance to review what's inside that envelope. I stood, tucking the folder under my arm. Thank you, Alan. He walked me to the door. Take care of yourself, Haley. You've been carrying a lot. Outside, the Montana air was cold and dry, but it felt easier to breathe than it had inside. I crossed the parking lot to my truck. Charlotte's rental SUV was gone, leaving only tire tracks in the gravel. I sat behind the wheel for a long moment, envelope in my lap, engine off. Through the windshield, I could see the city skyline in the distance, and, beyond that, the low hills where our family's land began. My fingers traced the edge of the envelope. Inside was whatever my father thought I needed to know before making any decisions. I started the truck, the diesel engine rumbling to life, and headed back toward the farmhouse. The sun was dipping behind the barns, throwing long shadows across the pasture. For the first time since coming home, I felt something shift, like the story I'd been told about our family wasn't the whole picture. The gravel road crunched under the tires as I turned into the driveway. The house looked the same as it had when I was a kid, peeling paint, sagging porch, windows glowing faintly from the lamps I'd left on that morning. But tonight it felt less like a burden and more like a question waiting for an answer. I parked, cut the engine, and sat quietly. The envelope was still in my hands. I could smell the faint scent of paper and ink through the seal. My father had hidden something in plain sight. The kitchen light spilled across the porch as I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The house creaked around me, familiar and solid. I set the envelope on the table next to my keys and stood there, listening to the refrigerator hum. My phone buzzed with a new message. It was from Alan. Remember, don't rush decisions. Read the documents carefully. We'll talk in the morning. I glanced at the envelope again. My hands itched to tear it open right then. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, same as it had during family dinners years ago. My father's handwriting on the front, Haley Monroe, looked firm despite the tremors he'd had at the end. I pulled out a chair and sat down. The paper felt heavier than it should. A lifetime of checklists and briefings had trained me to open orders immediately, but this wasn't an order. This was a trust. I slid a finger under the flap and broke the seal. The paper tore cleanly, and the smell of old envelopes mixed with coffee in the kitchen. Inside was a neat stack of documents clipped together with a yellow note on top in my father's handwriting. Review with Alan. Do not share until ready. My hands were steady as I flipped the note over and saw a single sentence scribbled at the bottom. What looks empty isn't always worthless. The first page was a letter from Franklin, typed but signed in ink. He explained how, during the company's peak, Big Sky Construction bought mineral rights under several parcels of family land as collateral for a government contract. He had transferred those rights to the farmhouse property to shield them from creditors when one of his partners went under. The documents underneath were agreements with Bison Minerals LLC, a Midwestern mining firm specializing in rare earth elements. Their logo was stamped across multiple letters offering to purchase or lease the mineral rights for $70 million plus ongoing royalties tied to production. I kept reading, my eyes scanning like I was back in a supply depot verifying shipments. Each page listed surveys, core samples, and independent valuations. Franklin had done his homework. The farmhouse everyone saw as a relic from the 1952nd sat on top of a deposit worth more than all of Big Sky's equipment combined. At the back of the packet was a typed memo to Alan. Ensure Haley reviews these and understands options before signing anything. Charlotte will want quick cash. Slow her down. I leaned back in the chair, the paper warm from my hands. My father hadn't just left me a house. He'd left me leverage. The next morning I drove back into Billings with the folder under my arm. Alan looked up from his desk as I walked in. You opened it, he said, more statement than question. Yes, I said. It's a lot. He nodded. Your father worked with me on this for months. He wanted you to have full information before making any decision. Bison Minerals has been trying to get those rights for a while. Franklin believed a hybrid deal would protect you from taxes and give you long-term income. I sat down. Charlotte doesn't know any of this? Not yet. He feared if she found out, she'd try to sell everything at once. That's why the will is structured with restrictions. Not end of it. I tapped the folder. What are my options? Alan pulled out a legal pad. Option 1. Sell outright for a lump sum. Option 2. Lease with royalties. Option 3. A hybrid partial sale with a royalty agreement. That's what your father favored. It provides immediate capital while keeping you tied to future profits. We can bring in an independent valuation to confirm Bison's numbers. I rubbed my forehead. This isn't my world. I'm good with supply chains, not mineral contracts. And that's why we're here, Alan said calmly. Your military experience actually helps. You're used to verifying details before signing. I thought of Charlotte's smirk in Alan's office the day before. She believed I'd been handed a liability. She had no idea. Alan slid a separate sheet across the desk. This is a non-disclosure agreement Franklin had prepared. Sign this before we proceed with Bison. It prevents leaks until negotiations are finalized. Men. I read it twice, signed, and handed it back. Good, Alan said. I'll arrange a meeting with Bison's regional manager tomorrow. In the meantime, do not discuss this with your sister. Let her think the farmhouse is just a farmhouse. Leaving the office, I felt the weight of the documents in my bag like a weapon I hadn't known I carried. The winter air stung my face as I walked to the truck. For the first time since Franklin's death, I wasn't just reacting. I had a plan forming. Back at the farmhouse, I spread the papers across the kitchen table. The maps showed colored layers under the property lines, each marked with codes. My logistics brain kicked in automatically, organizing data into a clear picture. The numbers were real. The signatures were real. The company had a reputation for paying. A knock on the door pulled me out of the papers. Charlotte stepped inside without waiting, balancing a designer tote and a cup of coffee. You look busy, she said, glancing at the maps. Just sorting Dad's paperwork, I said, sliding a stack over to cover the survey results. She set her coffee down and leaned against the counter. Good. You can box up whatever junk is left. I've got meetings in Chicago but wanted to drop by before I go. The company's a mess. Dad left me more problems than assets. I raised an eyebrow. You're surprised? She ignored the jab. I'm meeting someone next week who can help restructure. He's done huge government contracts. Might even help us leverage that land you're sitting on. My pulse ticked up, but I kept my face neutral. Who? Victor Palladino, she said, like the name should impress me. He used to be Dad's partner before all the contract drama. He knows the system. I forced myself to look casual. I've heard the name. He thinks your land could be collateral for a massive expansion. We're talking tens of millions. This could save Big Sky. And I stacked the papers neatly. That's ambitious. Have you run it by Alan? Her expression soured. Alan's a lawyer, not a strategist. Palladino has real connections. Anyway, enjoy your farmhouse. Maybe someday you'll thank me for turning it into something useful. She grabbed her coffee and headed for the door. Don't get too comfortable out here. When the door closed, I exhaled slowly. My father's warning echoed. Don't let Charlotte make any big moves without Alan. Palladino's reputation had surfaced in enough Pentagon briefings for me to know his name wasn't just a footnote. He'd been flagged for overbilling on base contracts years ago. I pulled my laptop closer and began searching public records. The screen filled with articles about lawsuits, settlements, and ongoing investigations. Palladino had walked away from 2 bankrupt companies just before federal audits. He was exactly the kind of operator Franklin would have feared. The more I read, the clearer it became. Charlotte was about to hand him the keys to everything. And unless I moved carefully, he'd take the mineral rights with him. I called a friend from my JAG days, Captain Lisa McDermott, who now worked stateside. Lisa, it's Haley. Quick question. You ever hear of a contractor named Victor Palladino? There was a pause, then a low whistle. Yeah, he's on a lot of people's radar. Why? Family business. He's circling my sister. Lisa's tone sharpened. Be careful. The Bureau's been sniffing around him for a while. If he's moving on your property, get legal cover before you breathe a word. I've got Alan. And documents. Good. And Haley, don't tip your hand. Call me if you need a contact at the Bureau. Appreciate it, I said, ending the call. The farmhouse was silent again except for the wind rattling the windows. I gathered the papers into a new order. Contracts, surveys, valuation, Palladino articles. Years of deployments had taught me how to plan for contingencies. This wasn't combat, but it felt like a mission. Outside, the sky was turning pale blue as the sun dropped behind the hills. I watched the light fade across the pasture where my father used to work, the land everyone thought was worthless. My sister thought she held all the cards. She had no idea what was under her feet. I closed the folder, set it on the table, and reached for a pen. There were calls to make, notes to draft, and meetings to prepare. The farmhouse no longer felt like a relic. It felt like a command post. Cold air poured through the cracked window as I tightened the curtain cord and watched a black SUV crawl up the gravel drive. Charlotte stepped out first, her heels sinking into the mud. Behind her came a tall man in an expensive coat, dark hair slicked back, smile practiced. Even from the kitchen window, I recognized Victor Palladino from the photos I'd pulled the night before. Seeing him in person gave the name weight, the kind of confidence built on loopholes and settlements. I opened the door before they could knock. Charlotte breezed past me like she owned the place. "This is Victor," she said, setting her purse on the counter. "He's here to look at the property." Palladino offered his hand. "Haley Monroe, I've heard about your service. Impressive record." His voice was smooth, but his eyes darted across the room like he was sizing up a deal. I shook his hand briefly. "You've done business with my father before." He smiled wider. "Long ago. We built things together when Big Sky was still small. Franklin was a visionary. I'm sorry for your loss." Charlotte opened her laptop on the table, brushing aside my stack of papers. "Victor has ideas to leverage the land and the company at the same time. He says we can bring in investors from Europe who specialize in rare earth extraction." I slid the papers back toward me. "Does Alan know you're meeting with him?" Charlotte rolled her eyes. "Alan's a lawyer, not a strategist. Victor knows how to make deals happen." Palladino spread his hands. "I don't want to intrude, just offering guidance. If your sister wants to cash out, I know people who will pay top dollar." "Cash out what?" I asked. He smiled again. "Rights. Future profits. Nothing risky for you. Everyone wins." The phrasing was so textbook it could have been lifted from a fraud prevention briefing. I kept my voice neutral. "Appreciate the interest, but this is still family property. We're reviewing our options with counsel." Charlotte closed her laptop sharply. "Haley, stop acting like a gatekeeper. You have no idea how complex this is. Dad left me a company in crisis. Victor can help, and your land is part of the puzzle." I met her stare. "The land isn't for sale." Palladino's smile flickered, but returned quickly. "Of course. Just a conversation." He checked his watch. "I have another meeting in town. Charlotte, I'll send over the term sheet." She followed him out to the SUV, talking fast. I stayed at the window, watching their breath fog in the cold. When they drove off, I grabbed my phone and dialed Lisa McDermott. "He's here," I said when she picked up. "You sure?" "Positive. He's pushing a European investor pitch." 2-0. Lisa's voice hardened. "Classic move. He's under active investigation for funneling money through shell companies overseas. If he's circling your assets, it's because he's desperate." What do I do? Document everything. Don't tip him off. I'll connect you with a special agent in Billings who handles procurement fraud. They'll want your evidence before making a move. Send me the contact, I said. Done. And Haley, watch your sister. He'll use her as a wedge. After hanging up, I sat at the kitchen table with the phone still in my hand. The house creaked as the wind picked up. Years of military planning ran through my head. Identify the threat, secure assets, establish comms, coordinate with allies. Same process, different battlefield. That afternoon I met Alan in his office again. He looked up from a stack of files. You've had visitors, he said, reading my face. Charlotte brought Palladino to the farmhouse, I said, handing him a printout of the articles I'd found. He's pushing some European investor deal. Alan frowned. I knew Franklin had a falling out with him over billing practices, but I didn't realize he was back in Montana. He is, I said, and Charlotte's listening to him. Alan flipped through the printouts. This complicates things. We'll need to involve law enforcement sooner rather than later. Do you have any written communication from him? I nodded. Charlotte mentioned he'd send a term sheet. When it arrives, I'll forward it. Alan leaned back. Good. Don't engage directly. Let him show his hand. Meanwhile, we'll expedite the independent valuation so you can lock in a deal with Bison before he can interfere. Lisa McDermott gave me an FBI contact, I added. Should I loop them in? Yes. Quietly. The more evidence they have, the stronger the case. 1. That night, back at the farmhouse, I scanned and organized every email, text, and note into a secure folder. The hum of the old refrigerator was the only sound as I typed. My father's maps lay spread out on the table, now annotated with my own color-coded sticky notes like an operations plan. A ping from my inbox drew my eye. An email from Charlotte with a PDF attached. Draft proposal, Palladino Group. I opened it and scrolled. The document was a sales agreement disguised as a joint venture. Transfer mineral rights in exchange for equity participation in a new holding company registered in Luxembourg. No signatures yet, but the intent was clear. I forwarded the file to Alan and the FBI contact Lisa had sent. Then I printed a copy and highlighted key sections. An hour later, Charlotte called. Did you get Victor's proposal? Yes, I said. Well, this could save Big Sky. Don't be stubborn. It's not saving Big Sky. It's selling out the one asset Dad protected. She sighed loudly. You've been back 5 minutes and suddenly you're the expert. You don't get it, Haley. You've been off playing soldier while I've been in the real world. Victor understands how to move fast. That's how you win. I kept my tone even. Fast isn't always winning. Whatever, she snapped. Sign or don't sign. But don't come crying to me when that farmhouse eats you alive with taxes. She hung up. I set the phone down, the dial tone humming like static. Out the window, the pasture was dark, dotted with snow patches. My father's words came back. Slow her down. I picked up my pen and began drafting a timeline of events, noting dates, times, and conversations. Each line felt like a brick in a wall between Palladino and our assets. The next morning, I met with the FBI agent Lisa had recommended, Special Agent Cole, in a small cafe on the edge of town. He was plainclothes, mid-40s, with the steady look of someone used to listening more than talking. I slid the printed proposal across the table. This came last night. He glanced through it quickly. This fits a pattern we've seen. Palladino creates shell partnerships overseas to move funds, then leaves partners holding liabilities when audits hit. What can you do? I asked. Build a case, but we need you to keep playing it straight. No hint you're working with us. Can you handle that? I met his eyes. I've done deployments in places where one wrong word got people killed. I can handle this. He nodded. Then we'll keep you updated. Forward any new communication directly to me. Back at the farmhouse, I placed the folder of evidence in a locked cabinet and sat down with a fresh legal pad. The house smelled of coffee and cold air. Charlotte thought she was orchestrating a rescue plan for the company. Palladino was orchestrating a cash grab. My job now was to let them both talk just long enough for the trap to close. I poured another cup of coffee and looked at the maps again. My father had buried more than mineral rights under this land. He'd buried a test of patience, discipline, and loyalty, the very skills he knew I'd carry home from the Corps. With the clock ticking on Charlotte's next move, I started drafting questions for the Bison Minerals meeting. The sooner I had a legitimate deal in place, the less leverage Palladino would have. The wind rattled the windows again, and I pulled my sweater tighter. In the quiet of the kitchen, the farmhouse no longer felt like a backdrop. It felt like the center of a battle where contracts replaced weapons and patience was the only armor worth wearing. The sound of my boots on the courthouse stairs echoed just like morning PT runs. I'd spent half the night sorting evidence, and I wasn't about to waste a minute. Inside, Alan had already set up a quiet room for me to use with my laptop. He closed the door and handed me a manila envelope. "Bank statements," he said. "Your dad kept copies of every transfer to Palladino's old shell company. We'll compare them with what Charlotte's been shown." I spread the pages across the table like a map before a mission. Dates, amounts, routing numbers all lined up with the invoices Palladino had billed Big Sky Construction years earlier. Alan slid me another stack. "These are the invoices Charlotte approved last month for consulting services. Notice anything?" I scanned quickly. "They're front-loaded," I said. "Big fees up front, vague deliverables later. He's locking her into payments before anything is produced." Alan nodded. "Classic procurement fraud. The FBI agent you met yesterday asked for digital copies. He's building probable cause." I opened my laptop and began uploading scanned PDFs to a secure drive. "They'll have them by noon," I said. Alan leaned on the table. "Haley, this is delicate. Charlotte still thinks Palladino's her savior. If she realizes you're working with law enforcement, she might warn him." I kept typing. "I'm not telling her anything, but I'm not letting him drain Dad's company either." By mid-morning, my phone buzzed with a text from Lisa. "Call me when you're alone." I stepped into the hallway. "Got your files," she said when I called. "Agent Cole's team is cross-referencing them with other victims. Palladino's pattern is clear use overseas consultants to funnel money out before the ink is dry. What do you need from me now? Stay close to your sister. Record any conversations you can, and don't sign anything. On." I returned to the room and found Alan on the phone with Charlotte. He covered the mouthpiece. "She's at Victor's office. Wants to know why you're digging through old paperwork." I gestured for him to put her on speaker. "Charlotte," I said, "I'm reviewing Dad's financial records before making decisions. That's normal due diligence." Her voice was sharp. "It's paranoid. Victor's been nothing but generous. He's even lined up a European buyer for the mineral rights. You're blowing it." "No." I kept my tone flat. "Then send me the buyer's actual offer. Not a draft. An official letter from their legal department." She hesitated. "They're finalizing it. You'll see soon." "Good," I said. "I'll have our attorney review it when it arrives." Alan ended the call. "She's in deep," he murmured. "Then we work faster," I replied. That afternoon, Agent Cole met me at a diner near the highway. He slid into the booth with a plain folder. "Palladino's shell companies are under surveillance," he said quietly. "We've been waiting for a cooperating witness. You could be the one." "I'm not wearing a wire," I said automatically. "Not yet, but if he pitches you directly, we'll want it documented. Do you think he'll approach you?" I sipped my coffee. "He wants the mineral rights. He'll come." Cole nodded. "Then be ready. Keep your phone on record mode. Don't confront him. Just let him talk." "I do." Back at the farmhouse, I set up a digital recorder under the edge of the kitchen table and another in the living room lamp. Years in logistics had taught me redundancy. One fails, another catches. I checked both twice, then sat down with my notebook. The door opened without a knock. Charlotte walked in, cheeks flushed from the wind. "You've been talking to Alan behind my back," she accused. "I'm talking to our lawyer about our inheritance," I corrected. "That's not behind your back, vet." She tossed a folder on the table. "Victor's proposal. Read it." I flipped through. Same Luxembourg holding company, same vague language, but now with a signature line for me. "Where's the buyer's name?" I asked. "They'll fill it in once you sign the initial agreement," she said impatiently. "This is how big deals work." "No, it's how bad deals work," I replied. "No named buyer, no deal." Charlotte crossed her arms. "You're impossible." I set the folder aside. "Sit down. We're going to go over Dad's financials together." She scoffed, but Saturday. For the next hour, I walked her through highlighted bank transfers, invoices, and mineral lease documents. She kept shifting in her seat, defensive but not blind. "This doesn't prove anything," she said finally. It proves enough to wait, I answered. If Palladino's offer is real, it will stand up to scrutiny. She pushed back her chair. You've always thought you're smarter because you wear a uniform. Newsflash, Haley. The military doesn't prepare you for real business. I met her eyes calmly. It prepared me to spot a con and to protect assets under pressure. That's real enough. She grabbed her coat and left without another word. As the door slammed, my phone buzzed again. Agent Cole. Good work. We're moving to the next stage. That evening, Alan came by with sandwiches. We sat at the kitchen table under the yellow light, the farmhouse feeling less like home and more like a command center. She's angry, he said. She's scared, I replied. She wants to save the company, but she's trusting the wrong person. Alan unwrapped his sandwich. Tomorrow, Bison Minerals will send their final hybrid offer. If you sign quickly, you cut Palladino off at the knees. I won't rush without reading it, I said. But yes, the sooner it's official, the safer we are. Ander too. We ate in silence for a few minutes. The old clock ticked on the wall. Finally, Alan spoke again. Your father would have been proud of how you're handling this. I looked at the stacks of paper, the recorders blinking red. He gave me the tools, I'm just using them. Night settled over the fields. I turned off the kitchen light but left the recorder running. Palladino's next move would come soon, and when it did, I'd be ready, documents organized, law enforcement looped in, and the discipline of years in uniform guiding every step. In the quiet house, the only sound was the steady hum of the fridge and the distant bark of a neighbor's dog. I opened my laptop again and drafted a list of direct questions for Palladino if he showed up. Names, dates, corporate registration numbers. The kind of questions that force a liar to hesitate. With each line I wrote, the plan sharpened. This wasn't about beating my sister. It was about protecting both of us from someone who saw family tragedy as a profit window. And the more evidence I gathered, the less room Palladino would have to maneuver when the walls closed in. The farmhouse smelled faintly of coffee and printer ink as I stacked the last set of documents into a neat pile. My boots were by the door, my coat ready. I glanced once at my phone on the table, its recorder app open, then at the dark window where my own reflection stared back, alert, tired, but steady. This was no longer just inheritance paperwork. It was an operation, and I was running it to the letter. Morning light spilled across the kitchen table where my documents were laid out like a field plan. The phone buzzed with an email notification from Bison Minerals. Subject line, final hybrid offer. My hands stayed steady as I clicked it open. $40 million upfront plus long-term royalties with a detailed schedule of extraction, environmental safeguards, and a 30-page appendix of market risk projections. This was no scam. It read like a military op order. I called Alan immediately. It's here, I said. I'm already on my way, he replied. 20 minutes later, his Subaru pulled into the drive. He stepped in, shaking snow from his coat, and laid out his laptop. Let's go line by line, he said. We moved through each clause together. The upfront payment was deposited in an escrow account with a top-tier Montana bank. Royalties adjusted quarterly, audited by an independent firm. Arbitration venue in-state, not overseas. It was solid. Alan looked up from the screen. This is exactly the kind of structure your father wanted. I scribbled notes in the margin. I'll still have Lisa's team run a background check on every signatory. No loose ends. 01. The door swung open and Charlotte entered without knocking. Designer coat over sweats like she hadn't slept. Did you get the offer? She demanded. Yes, I said evenly. We're reviewing it. She dropped her purse onto the table. Good, because Victor says he can beat it. He's lined up a European consortium at $70 million. Cash. Alan's eyebrows rose. Consortium? Which one? Charlotte waved a manicured hand. They're finalizing the paperwork. All you have to do is hold off signing for 24 hours. I closed the laptop. If it's real, I'll review it when it arrives. Until then, Bison is the only legitimate offer. Charlotte's tone sharpened. You're going to blow the deal of a lifetime because you're too stubborn to admit Victor knows more than you. I stood, pushing my chair back slowly. I'm not blowing anything. I'm protecting an asset Dad trusted me with. Send me a real contract, not a promise. An S, she glared, then spun on her heel and left. Alan exhaled. She's doubling down. I sat again. Let her. If Palladino has a real buyer, they'll send real paperwork. Meanwhile, we lock our side tight. By mid-afternoon, Lisa texted, "Bison Minerals clean. No red flags. Sign when ready." I forwarded the message to Alan. We scheduled a call with Bison's lead negotiator, Dr. Chen, for 4 p.m. She appeared on my laptop screen in a crisp blazer, speaking from a conference room lined with charts. "Miss Monroe, Mr. Whitaker," she greeted. "We're pleased to present our final offer. Please ask anything you like." I went straight to my prepared questions: environmental compliance, royalty audits, bankruptcy contingencies. Dr. Chen answered each with specifics, even pulling up maps and regulatory permits. Her calm precision was a stark contrast to Palladino's flashy promises. Alan leaned toward the camera. "Our client wants a clause allowing review of extraction methods every 5 years with the option to renegotiate royalties if market prices double." Dr. Chen nodded. "We can add that. I'll send an amended draft tonight." When the call ended, I leaned back in my chair. "That's what professionalism looks like," I said. Alan smiled faintly. "You're a natural at this." "It's just logistics," I said. "Different battlefield." Night fell early. I brewed coffee and reread the contract twice. My notes filled an entire yellow pad. By the time I set the pen down, every clause was cross-checked. At 8 o'clock, my phone rang Charlotte. I hit speaker. "Victor says you're about to sign with Bison," she said. "I'm considering it," I replied. "He says the European offer is real but time-sensitive. If you sign now, you'll lose tens of millions." "Then have Victor send the official documents tonight," I said calmly. "Not a draft, a full contract from the buyer's counsel." Silence. Then, "You're making a mistake, Haley." "Or I'm avoiding one," I answered. She hung up. Alan looked at me. "He's pushing hard. Classic tactic, create urgency to override due diligence." I poured coffee into 2 mugs. He picked the wrong target. An hour later, an email arrived from Palladino Group. "Intent to purchase, European Consortium." I opened it. The letterhead looked generic. No signatures, no address, no legal entity number. Just a promise of $70 million within 30 days if we signed an exclusivity agreement immediately. I forwarded it to Agent Cole with a single line. "Is this what you need?" His reply came fast. "Perfect. Sit tight." I closed the laptop and felt the farmhouse settle around me. The wind outside rattled the barn door. Inside, the kitchen smelled of coffee and printer ink. My mind ticked through contingency plans the way it had before convoys in Afghanistan: what could go wrong, who had comms, where the exits were. Alan packed his bag. "I'll be back at 9 tomorrow. We'll finalize after Dr. Chen sends the amended draft." I walked him to the door. "Thanks, Alan. Get some sleep." After he left, I sat alone at the table, phone recording quietly beside me. Charlotte thought this was about money. Palladino thought it was about leverage. But sitting there with a pen in my hand, I knew it was about discipline. Dad had built a firewall of patience into his will. My job was to hold that line. I opened my notebook and wrote out tomorrow's agenda. Confirm Bison's escrow details with the bank. Forward Palladino's fake offer to Agent Cole. Prepare talking points for Charlotte that didn't sound like an ambush, but left no wiggle room. Through the window, I could see the dark outline of the fields, the same land Dad had walked every morning at sunrise. It wasn't just dirt. It was a test of character, of timing, of whether I'd learned what he tried to teach us. I shut the notebook and reached for the phone to call Lisa one more time. "We're moving," I said when she answered. "You're doing great," she replied. "Stay steady. The FBI is lining up warrants for Palladino's financial records." "Good," I said, "because tomorrow I'm going to close a legitimate deal." I hung up and switched off the kitchen light. The farmhouse was silent, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the faint click of the recorder. My boots were still by the door, my coat on the hook, papers stacked like an operations file, ready for 0 to 600. Every movement felt deliberate, like prepping gear before a mission. There was no tension about what came next, only focus. Contracts, clauses, signatures, evidence. The kind of fight where patience wins and flash loses. I woke before dawn, the farmhouse still cold, and started a pot of coffee. While it brewed, I set my phone on the table and reread Palladino's intent to purchase letter one more time. The font, the spacing, the lack of an address, everything screamed fake. Years of reviewing supply contracts had trained my eye to spot holes fast. This one was a net made of holes. By 7, Alan arrived with a banker from Helena to walk me through the escrow details. We sat at the kitchen table under the yellow light, verifying account numbers and release conditions. Funds are ready, the banker said. Once you sign with Bison Minerals, the transfer posts same day. I initialed the last page. Good, I said. That's one less lever for Palladino to pull. Alan packed up the paperwork just as Charlotte's car appeared in the drive. She walked in fast, phone in hand, hair still wet from a rushed shower. Victor's furious, she said. He says you're about to sign away tens of millions. I poured her coffee and slid it across the table. Sit down. She stayed standing. This isn't a joke, Haley. The European offer is real. He says their legal team will send final documents today if you give them exclusivity. I pointed to the letter on the table. This? It's not a contract. It's a bluff. Her eyes flashed. You think you're smarter than everyone. I think I'm reading what's in front of me, I replied evenly. Real buyers put names on paper. This is just promises. Charlotte's voice rose. Victor believes in this family. He's trying to help. You're making me look like a fool in front of him. I held her gaze. He's making you a pawn. Stop letting him. She slammed the coffee mug down, spilling a brown arc across the table. You're impossible. Alan stayed silent, letting the tension hang. Finally, Charlotte grabbed her phone. Victor wants to meet you face to face, she said. Today at noon. Will you at least hear him out? I wiped up the spill with a paper towel. I'll hear him, I said. When she left the room to call him back, Alan leaned close. You're sure about this? Yes, I said. If he's going to make a pitch, I want it recorded. Alan nodded slowly. Then we do it by the book. I'll notify Agent Cole right now. End quote. At 11:30, Cole's unmarked SUV rolled up the drive. He stepped inside with 2 other agents, both in plain clothes. We'll be in the back room, he said quietly. Your phone will capture audio. Don't provoke him. Just let him talk. I set my phone on the table, screen dark but recorder running, and arranged the Bison Minerals contract neatly beside it. My pulse felt steady, like before a timed range qualification. At exactly noon, a black Escalade pulled up. Palladino stepped out alone, a leather folder under his arm, smile already in place. He knocked once and let himself in when I opened the door. Miss Monroe, he said smoothly. Thank you for agreeing to meet. Charlotte tells me you're hesitant about an extraordinary opportunity. I gestured to the chair across from me. Sit. Show me what you've got. He sat, opening the folder to reveal more blank-looking pages. This, he said, sliding one toward me, is a letter of intent from a European consortium prepared to pay $75 million for your mineral rights. That's $35 million more than Bison. I didn't touch the paper. Which consortium? They're discreet, he said. High net worth investors in renewable energy. They require confidentiality until the exclusivity agreement is signed. Then they're not real, I said flatly. He chuckled softly. You're cautious. That's good. But sometimes you have to move fast to win big. I leaned forward slightly. I learned in the Marines that moving fast without intel gets people killed. Show me a real contract with names and signatures. His smile thinned. If you wait 24 hours before signing with Bison, the documents will be ready. You'll be rich beyond anything you imagined. I reached for the Bison contract and handed it to him. Already read, already vetted, already funded, I said. I'm signing with them this afternoon. For the first time, his expression cracked. You're making a grave mistake, he snapped. That European company was going to change your life. No, I said quietly. This deal was going to change yours. He stood abruptly, gathering his papers. You think you're clever. You're not. You're just a soldier who doesn't understand business. I stayed seated. Leave my house, Mr. Palladino. He glared at me for a long moment, then stormed out. Through the window, I saw him yank open the Escalade door and drive off, tires spitting gravel. Cole and his agents emerged from the back room, calm but purposeful. We've got everything, he said. Enough for warrants and maybe an arrest. Alan exhaled. That was textbook. I stood and poured more coffee, my hands steady. Textbook logistics, I said. Same as always. Charlotte texted 15 minutes later. Victor says you humiliated him. He's done trying to help. Don't come to me when Bison screws you. I set the phone down without answering. The kitchen smelled of spilled coffee and cold air, but the tension had shifted. For the first time in weeks, I felt the ground under me solid instead of shifting. Alan packed up his laptop. Bison's rep is ready at 2 p.m., he said. We can sign in my office. I nodded. Let's get it done. He left to prepare the paperwork. Cole stayed behind a moment. You handled him perfectly, he said. If he reaches out again, let us know immediately. I will, I replied. He left, and the farmhouse was quiet again. I walked to the window and looked out at the snow-patched fields. My father's land, my responsibility, my sister's blind trust in a con man, all of it now sitting in neat stacks of evidence ready for law enforcement. I picked up the phone and called Bison Minerals. Dr. Chen, I said when she answered, we're ready to move forward. Send the final version to Alan's office. And is sick, she sounded pleased. We'll be there at 2 with our legal team and the escrow officer. I hung up and closed my eyes for a moment, breathing in the scent of coffee and paper. This wasn't a victory lap. It was just the next step in securing what Dad had protected. The house creaked as the wind shifted, and I tightened my grip on the pen lying beside the contract. Everything was lined up, every detail checked. Boots on, coat zipped, documents in hand, I walked out to my truck. The cold hit my face sharp and clean. It felt like stepping off a plane into a deployment zone, everything uncertain but the plan in my head. I slid behind the wheel, started the engine, and drove toward town where Alan's office waited with the Bison team. The road ahead was clear, and I kept my eyes steady on it. One hand on the folder, the other on the wheel, and the same focus I'd used on convoys halfway around the world now guiding me through a different kind of battlefield. The smell of fresh toner filled Alan's conference room as his paralegal lined up signature pages. Bison Minerals' team occupied one side of the long oak table, neat stacks of documents in front of them. On our side sat Alan Me, a quiet escrow officer, and 2 bank reps. Dr. Chen greeted me with a steady handshake. We have the amended clauses you requested, she said. Independent audits every 5 years and a renegotiation trigger if market prices spike. I flipped through the new pages quickly, pen in hand. Each clause was highlighted, initials ready. Alan whispered, funds confirmed in escrow. As soon as you sign, they're yours. I signed the first set, initialed the second, kept moving. Years of requisition paperwork had taught me to handle stacks without losing track. Dr. Chen's team countersigned with practiced efficiency. Midway through, Charlotte entered uninvited, Victor Palladino just behind her. She looked pale but determined. He looked slicker than usual, a fresh tie hiding the cracks. Stop, Charlotte said, voice raised. You can't sign until you hear us out. Alan stood but kept his tone even. This is a private closing. Victor smiled like a man who thought he'd won. We're here to present a superior offer. I capped my pen. Where's the signed contract from your European buyer? Victor opened his leather folder and produced another thin stack. Right here. 75 million, immediate transfer. I took it without breaking eye contact and flipped the top page. The contract was a copy of the same fake letter with a new date. No buyer name, no signature from any legal entity, only a shell company in Luxembourg I'd already traced through Agent Cole. I slid it back across the table. This isn't a contract. This is fraud. Victor's smile twitched. You're making a mistake you'll regret. I reached for the pen again. No. I'm making a decision you'll regret. He slammed a palm on the table. You don't know who you're dealing with. The door opened and Special Agent Cole walked in with 2 deputies, badges out. Actually, Mr. Palladino, he said calmly. We do. Victor spun around. What is this? Cole stepped closer. Victor Palladino, you're under arrest for wire fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, and attempted extortion. Charlotte gasped. What? One deputy guided Victor's hands behind his back and clicked on the cuffs. The other collected his folder as evidence. Victor tried to pull away. You have no case. This is harassment. Cole kept his voice level. We have documented patterns across multiple states, plus today's attempt to solicit an exclusivity agreement with falsified documents. You're done. Victor turned his head toward me as they let him out. You think you've won? Those minerals will ruin you. Everyone thinks they're smarter than me until they're broke. I stayed seated, pen still in hand. Enjoy your day, Victor. The deputies escorted him out. Cole paused at the doorway. Miss Monroe, thank you for your cooperation. We'll be in touch. Charlotte sat down hard, color draining from her face. He said he could save us, she whispered. Alan placed a folder gently in front of her. He was saving himself. Your father knew this. She looked at me, eyes wide. You set him up? I protected the company, I said simply, and I protected you from losing everything. Her hands shook as she reached for the folder. Alan pushed a bottle of water toward her. Drink, he said softly. Dr. Chen cleared her throat. Shall we continue? I signed the next page. My initials looked steady, each letter a nail closing a door. Dr. Chen countersigned. The escrow officer verified signatures, stamped the documents, and handed me a receipt for the wired funds. 40 million transferred. Royalties secured. Environmental safeguards locked. Alan smiled faintly. It's done. I exhaled, but there was no rush of triumph, just a sense of weight shifting off my shoulders. Charlotte stared at the table, then at me. Dad left it to you for a reason, she said quietly. Yes, I answered. Because he knew patience wins where greed fails. Dr. Chen extended her hand again. Congratulations, Miss Monroe. We'll begin preliminary work on site next quarter. I shook her hand firmly. Thank you for your professionalism. As Bison's team packed their briefcases, Charlotte stood. I need air, she muttered. I followed her outside. The winter sun reflected off the courthouse windows, bright enough to make her squint. She wrapped her arms around herself. I thought Victor was the answer, she said. He talked like he had everything under control. That's his skill, I replied. He looks for families in crisis, then sells them a rescue plan that's really a trap. Her eyes filled but didn't spill. I almost gave him everything Dad built. You didn't, I said. That's what matters. We stood there for a moment, breath fogging. Finally, she looked at me straight. What happens now? You run the company, I said. And you run it right. No shortcuts, no outside saviors. You'll have 5 years to prove Dad's trust wasn't wasted. She nodded slowly. Will you help me? I'll advise when you ask, I said. But the work is yours. Alan stepped out with a copy of the signed contract in a sealed envelope. Here you go, he said. Keep this somewhere safe. I tucked it under my arm. Thanks. Cole approached from the curb, his deputies loading Palladino into an unmarked car. He'll be arraigned this afternoon, Cole said. We've seized his accounts. If he reaches out again from custody, call me immediately. I nodded. Appreciate everything, Agent Cole. He extended his hand. You handled this like a pro. Most people panic when big money and family mix. You stayed calm. Training pays off, I said, shaking his hand. The car door closed on Palladino. He shot me one last look, equal parts rage and disbelief, before the vehicle pulled away into traffic. Charlotte watched it disappear. I don't know how to fix what I've done, she said. Start by showing up at the office tomorrow, I told her. Learn the books. Meet every employee. Dad built more than contracts, he built a reputation. Keep it. She took a long breath and nodded again. Alan glanced at his watch. We should file these with the county before the clerk's office closes. Let's go, I said. Inside, the clerk stamped our documents, entering them into the public record. Each thump of the stamp felt final. When we stepped back out into the pale sunlight, the air felt different, not lighter, but cleaner. Charlotte slipped her hands into her coat pockets. Thank you, she said quietly, even if I didn't deserve it. This isn't about deserving, I replied. It's about doing what's right with what we were given. We walked to our separate cars. My truck smelled of cold air and legal paper. On the passenger seat lay the sealed envelope with my father's land deal inside, the culmination of weeks of tension, paperwork, and patience. As I drove back toward the farmhouse, snow flurries started to drift across the road. The fields on either side stretched white and silent, the same land my father had protected with quiet sacrifices and long-term thinking. My hands on the wheel felt steady. The farmhouse appeared ahead, windows reflecting the gray sky. I parked, carried the envelope inside, and placed it in the old desk drawer where Dad used to keep his ledgers. The room smelled faintly of wood smoke and paper. I stood there a moment, not to savor victory, but to anchor myself. The job wasn't glamorous, it was steady work, the kind that left no headlines but built a future. And in that steadiness, the chaos Palladino had tried to unleash couldn't take root. Outside, a neighbor's truck rattled down the gravel road, carrying lumber for a barn. Inside, the old clock ticked on the wall. Everything ordinary, everything solid. The farmhouse had become my command post, but now it felt more like a home again. I sat at the kitchen table and began a new list, not of threats, but of tasks. Coordinate with Bison's site survey team, review environmental permits, schedule a call with Lisa to thank her, check on the company's payroll schedule for Charlotte. Each line was a brick in rebuilding trust, a plan not for defense, but for growth. The coffee pot hissed as it reheated, and I poured a fresh cup. My hands no longer shook. The long fight over Dad's legacy had shifted from reaction to action, and the only thing left was to do the work. Sunlight spilled across the kitchen table where I'd spread out the week's mail and the first invoices from Bison Minerals. The farmhouse smelled of coffee and sawdust from a minor repair I'd done that morning. Charlotte's rental car crunched up the gravel drive. When she came inside, she didn't storm or lecture. She held a yellow legal pad and looked almost unsure of herself. "I went to the office at 6 this morning," she said quietly. "Met every foreman, every project lead. Alan gave me the full financial breakdown. It's worse than I thought, but it's not unsalvageable." I poured her coffee and gestured to the chair across from me. "Good start." She sat, sliding the legal pad toward me. Payroll, outstanding contracts, supplier obligations. Dad had been keeping things afloat with short-term lines of credit. Victor didn't mention any of this, of course. No. I skimmed her notes. They were neat, color-coded, questions listed in the margins. "Looks like you're finally seeing the real picture," I said. Charlotte rubbed her temples. "I've been so sure I was the only adult in the room. Turns out I was the mark." I didn't answer right away. The old clock ticked on the wall. Finally, I said, "You're here now. That's what matters." She took a sip of coffee. "I met with the project managers. They were nervous but respectful. One of them told me, Dad used to visit every site personally. He'd ask about their families. I didn't even know their names until today. That's what leadership looks like," I said. "Not just numbers on a spreadsheet." Charlotte stared at her notes. "I need to fix this, Haley. I don't know if I can." "You can," I said, "but you'll have to slow down and listen. Stop chasing shortcuts. Earn their trust back." She gave a short, humorless laugh. That's rich coming from the sister, who just landed $40 million. I leaned back. I didn't land anything. I spent weeks vetting, reading, coordinating with lawyers and agents. The money isn't a windfall, it's a responsibility. Charlotte's expression softened. "Dad said that to me once." I brushed him off. We went over her legal pad line by line, just like I'd done with my own contracts. I explained cash flow cycles, the importance of keeping equipment maintained, the danger of overextending on speculative bids. She asked real questions and wrote down the answers. The conversation felt less like combat, more like briefing a junior officer. By noon, she closed the pad and sat back. "I'm exhausted," she said, "but it feels cleaner. Like for the first time I'm not being sold something." "That's because you're doing the work yourself," I said. She nodded slowly. "I want to move out of the hotel. Could I stay here for a while? The company apartment downtown feels like Victor's shadow." I hesitated only a moment. "Dad's room is empty. Sheets are clean. You can use it." She blinked. "You'd let me stay here after everything?" "This house is too big for one person," I said simply. "But there's one condition. No secrets. We talk before making big decisions. That's non-negotiable." Charlotte's eyes filled, but she held it together. "Deal," she said. We spent the afternoon setting up her laptop at the dining room table. I gave her access to the files Alan had prepared. She called the accounting manager and scheduled a staff meeting for the next morning. She even drafted an internal memo acknowledging the recent confusion and reaffirming the company's commitment to honest operations. At 3 o'clock, Alan stopped by with a stack of documents. "This is the transition plan for Charlotte taking over day-to-day management," he said. "It outlines decision protocols, spending limits, and monthly reporting. Standard best practices." Charlotte signed without complaint. "If it keeps me from another Victor, I'm in," she said. Alan smiled. Your father would be pleased. When he left, Charlotte and I took a walk around the property. The fields were dotted with survey flags where Bison's engineers had taken soil samples. Snowmelt glistened in shallow ditches. I used to hate this place, she said quietly. Thought it was a symbol of everything small and boring. Now it looks different. It hasn't changed, I said. You have. She kicked at a patch of gravel. I almost lost all of it. The company, the land, you. I don't know how to make that right. Start by running Big Sky the way Dad wanted, I said. And by staying honest when things get hard. That's enough. Back at the house, she unpacked a small suitcase into Dad's old room. I heard drawers sliding and the faint thump of a closet door. It sounded like a shift. Not just of location, but of intent. We cooked dinner together, simple pasta and salad. She chopped vegetables while I stirred sauce. Conversation stayed practical. Staff benefits, safety standards on job sites, how to handle a backlog of invoices. It felt less like a truce and more like building something. After dishes were done, Charlotte sat at the table with her laptop again. I've scheduled meetings with every supplier, she said, and I want to visit each active site over the next month. No more delegating that to some consultant. That's leadership, I said. She looked at me. Will you come to the first one? Just to help me read the room? I'll drive, I said. The old clock ticked softly. Outside, the wind rattled a loose piece of siding on the barn. Inside, two sisters worked quietly on separate laptops, the glow of the screens casting overlapping circles of light on the table. The air felt steady. At 9, Charlotte closed her laptop. I'm going to bed, she said. Early start tomorrow. Good idea, I replied. She paused at the doorway. Haley, thanks for not giving up on me. I met her eyes. We're family, that's the job. She nodded once and went down the hall. I sat alone for a while, updating my own list of tasks. Coordinate with Bison's project manager, review the escrow confirmation, send Agent Cole the latest documents from Palladino's laptop the FBI had seized. Each line neat, each box waiting for a checkmark. The farmhouse was quiet except for the hum of the fridge and the occasional creak of old wood. I looked at the two laptops on the table, at the notes Charlotte had left in a neat stack, at the signature pages from the transition plan drying on the counter. It wasn't about winning a fight anymore. It was about holding a line long enough for someone else to cross over to it. The coffee pot clicked off, and I poured one last cup, letting the heat steady my hands. Outside the window, the field stretched dark, and still under a sky full of faint stars. Inside, the house held the sound of someone moving quietly in a room down the hall, a sign that change had begun in real actions, not promises. I sipped my coffee, closed my notebook, and reached for the next file in the stack. There was still work to do, but the direction felt clear, the ground firm under my feet. Morning frost still clung to the grass when we pulled into Big Sky's main office. Charlotte was driving her own car now instead of the chauffeured SUV Victor had sent. She wore boots instead of heels and had a hard hat in the back seat. I carried a thermos of coffee and a folder of notes. The parking lot smelled of diesel and sawdust as crews loaded equipment for the day. Inside, Alan was waiting in the conference room with Dr. Chen and two of Bison Minerals' project managers. Maps of the mineral site covered the walls. Charlotte took a deep breath and stepped forward first, shaking hands and introducing herself to everyone by name. Her voice was steady, no flash, no marketing pitch. Alan opened the meeting. We're here to finalize the implementation schedule for the Mineral Rights Agreement and outline Big Sky's new veteran-focused construction initiatives. Charlotte nodded. Our crews have been briefed. We're ready to coordinate access roads and safety zones for Bison's survey teams. We'll also be hiring a group of veterans with heavy equipment experience for the initial site prep. Dr. Chen smiled. We're happy to partner on that. We've built similar programs in other states. It makes for better work and stronger communities. I poured coffee for everyone and spread out my own checklist: permits, insurance certificates, emergency contacts. My handwriting filled each column like a convoy manifest. Charlotte leaned over to see and jotted a few items on her pad. For the next 2 hours, we worked through the details. Royalties would be distributed quarterly, environmental audits scheduled annually, and a joint committee formed to review safety procedures. Charlotte asked pointed questions about soil remediation and water testing. Dr. Chen answered with data and timelines. Alan kept the paperwork flowing. By noon, the documents were ready for signature. Alan laid them out neatly on the table, each tab marked. Charlotte, you sign as president of Big Sky. Haley, you sign as landowner, he said. Charlotte picked up the pen first. Her hand trembled only slightly as she signed her name on each page. When she was done, she looked up at me. Dad would want this, she said. I signed next, initials on each clause, signature on each line. When the last page was done, Alan gathered the stack and handed it to the escrow officer. Funds will disperse within the hour, he said. Dr. Chen extended her hand. Congratulations. We'll begin mobilizing equipment next month. Charlotte shook her hand firmly. Thank you for treating this land with respect, she said. The room felt different, less like a battlefield, more like a work site. Everyone began discussing logistics. Survey flags, access permits, schedules for the veterans hiring fair. Charlotte listened, took notes, and delegated tasks to her assistant without looking at me for approval. After the meeting, we walked out to the parking lot where crews were loading trucks. One worker saluted me playfully. Heard you're the Marine who saved the company, he said. I grinned. Just doing my job. Charlotte climbed onto a low concrete barrier and looked over the yard. I've never actually watched them start the day, she said. It's different from the view in a boardroom. That's where Dad spent his mornings, I replied. You'll learn a lot out here. She hopped down. I already am. We drove back to the farmhouse for lunch. Charlotte carried a bag of sandwiches from the deli in town. Inside, she spread blueprints across the table while I poured drinks. Alan says the veterans hiring fair will get local press, she said. I want to do it right. Not a photo op. Real jobs. Then start with training budgets, I said. They'll need certification on some of the equipment Bison uses. Build that into your costs now. She scribbled a note. Got it. I watched her for a moment. The woman who had once breezed into meetings with Victor's promises was now planning OSHA training for heavy equipment operators. It was a different kind of power, quiet, competent, built on details instead of flash. After lunch, we walked the property with Bison's lead surveyor. He pointed out where access roads would go, where staging areas would be set up. Charlotte asked about erosion control and wildlife impact. He explained mitigation measures and she took notes. Back at the house, Alan called with confirmation. The escrow transfer had posted. $40 million wired. Royalty schedule active. He also said the county clerk had processed all filings for mineral rights and corporate documents. Everything was official. Charlotte set down her pen and looked out the window at the fields. We did it, she said softly. We started it, I corrected. Now comes the hard part, doing it right. She smiled faintly. I can handle that. That evening, we sat at the kitchen table eating leftover sandwiches, laptops open. Charlotte drafted a letter to employees outlining the company's new direction and commitment to veteran hiring. I reviewed a draft press release with Bison's communications team. The air smelled of coffee and printer ink again, but the tension had changed from defensive to constructive. Charlotte closed her laptop. You're staying in the reserves, right? She asked. Yes, I said. 2 weeks a year plus monthly drills. Keeps me sharp. She nodded. I like that. Discipline built in. I sipped my coffee. It also keeps perspective. Reminds me what matters. And agreed. The farmhouse creaked as the night wind picked up. Charlotte gathered her notes and stacked them neatly. I'm going to call the site managers before bed, she said. Make sure they're ready for tomorrow. Good plan, I replied. She paused at the doorway. I can't undo the last few weeks, she said, but I can do the next ones right. That's all anyone can do, I said. She gave a small nod and went to make her calls. I sat alone for a while, looking at the signed contracts, the neat stacks of paper, the glow of the desk lamp on the wood grain. The farmhouse felt less like a command post now, and more like a staging area for growth. Outside, the fields lay dark and quiet under a thin layer of frost. Inside, two sisters were finally pulling in the same direction. One running a company, the other keeping watch, both carrying the weight of a father's lesson. Discipline beats shortcuts. Patience outlasts schemes. I closed my notebook, set my pen on top, and reached for the thermos to refill my cup. The coffee was still hot, steady and familiar, the kind of small consistency that makes big work possible. The first royalty payment landed on a Tuesday morning just as frost melted off the fence posts. I was at the kitchen table reconciling Bison's latest project schedule with Charlotte's updated payroll plan when the bank notification popped onto my phone. $40 million in escrow already transferred weeks ago, and now the first quarterly royalty posted exactly as agreed. I slid the screen across to Charlotte without a word. She glanced at it, then back at me. "That's real," she said softly. "Money actually moving the right way." "Exactly on time," I replied. "Audited and clean." She set down her pen and exhaled. "I've been waiting for the other shoe to drop." "Shoes drop when you trust con men," I said. "This is just work paying off." The farmhouse smelled of fresh coffee and printer ink again. In the living room, a box of training manuals for the new veteran hires sat open. Charlotte had insisted on paying for certification courses out of Big Sky's own budget rather than pushing it onto the workers. She'd spent the past month visiting job sites, wearing steel-toed boots, and learning employees' names. Alan stopped by with paperwork for a state grant to support veteran hiring. He set the folder on the table. "The governor's office is impressed," he said. "They're citing Big Sky as a model for post-service employment." Charlotte smiled faintly. "Feels good to be known for something other than scandals." "It's not a PR stunt," Alan replied. "You're actually doing the work." While they talked, I pulled out a letter Dad had written and left sealed with Alan to deliver once the mineral deal closed. The envelope was thick, his handwriting firm on the front. I broke the seal and unfolded the pages. "Haley and Charlotte," it began. "If you're reading this, the land deal is done. I split things the way I did not to punish either of you but to give you both a test. One would require patience, the other leadership. Together they make a legacy. Don't let anyone trade that for shortcuts." "Dad," Charlotte read over my shoulder, eyes shining. "He knew exactly what he was doing," she whispered. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the envelope. "He always did." Alan gathered his papers. "I'll let you two get back to work," he said. "I've got another client in Billings." After he left, Charlotte leaned back in her chair. "You're staying in the reserves?" "Yes," I said. "Drills next month. Keeps me grounded." She nodded. "It shows. You treat this whole thing like an operation." "It is an operation," I said. "We're just using contracts instead of gear." The phone rang. It was Lisa McDermott from JAG Corps. "Wanted to give you an update," she said. "Palladino pled guilty this morning. Wire fraud and conspiracy. He's agreed to restitution for multiple victims." "Good," I said. "How long?" "Sentencing in 6 weeks, but he's out of your hair." "Thanks, Lisa," I said. "Couldn't have done it without you." Charlotte looked up from her notes when I hung up. "He pled guilty?" "Yeah," I said. "FBI nailed him." She rubbed her forehead. "I almost helped him." "You didn't," I said simply. She closed her notebook. "I want to visit the site tomorrow. Meet the veteran crew myself." "Good idea," I said. The next day we drove out to the edge of the property, where Bison's engineers had started preliminary work. Survey stakes dotted the snow-dusted field, and a line of heavy equipment stood ready. Men and women in hard hats, some still wearing old unit patches on their jackets, waved as we approached. Charlotte introduced herself to each one, asked about their certifications, and listened to their stories. One former Army mechanic grinned at her. "This job's the first steady thing I've had since leaving the service," he said. "That's why we're doing it," Charlotte replied. I watched her shake hands and take notes, her boots sinking into the mud. She wasn't posing. She was working. Later, standing by the truck, she looked at me. "This feels different from the boardroom. It feels like we're building something real." "That's because we are," I said. We drove back as the sun set over the mountains, the sky streaked with orange and purple. The road wound past fields Dad had walked every morning. Charlotte stared out the window. "I used to think revenge meant destroying someone," she said. "Now it feels like it means not letting them destroy you." I smiled. That's closer to the truth. Back at the farmhouse, we cooked dinner together again. No tension now, just two sisters working side by side. After dishes were done, Charlotte sat at the table drafting a speech for a local veterans event. I reviewed a new Bison Minerals safety report. The house hummed with quiet purpose. Later that night, Charlotte came to the kitchen doorway. "You ever think about leaving the Corps?" "Sometimes," I said. "But it gave me the tools to handle this. I like staying connected." She nodded. I guess Dad knew we'd need different strengths. I closed the report and looked at her. He trusted us to grow into them. Outside, a light snow began to fall, soft against the window. Inside, the old clock ticked steadily. The farmhouse no longer felt like a command post at all. It felt like a base for a new kind of mission. Steady work, honest leadership, and a family rebuilt without shortcuts. Charlotte sat across from me, her legal pad open to a new page headed, "Next Quarter Goals." She tapped her pen. "I'm thinking of starting an apprenticeship program," she said. "Teach young vets construction management, long-term pipeline for the company." "That's exactly the kind of thinking Dad would have wanted," I said. She smiled. "Good. Then I'm on the right track." I poured us both fresh coffee. "To staying on it," I said. We clinked mugs lightly. The sound was small but solid, like a nail set true into wood. When I finally turned off the kitchen light, the house was quiet, except for the hum of the fridge and the faint scratch of Charlotte's pen as she kept writing in the other room. The land outside lay still under the snow, not as a prize to be sold, but as a foundation for work and patience. The first royalty payment, the veterans on the job site, the signed contracts, the sealed envelope of Dad's letter, all of it sat not as trophies but as tools. Revenge had taken the shape of discipline, long-term vision, and family pulled back from the edge. I set my boots by the door, ready for tomorrow's tasks, and felt the weight of the past few months settle into something steady. Not an ending, but a life built on the hard work of doing things right.